No one knew what he had carefully kept hidden throughout his life, a secret that even his loved ones could not have imagined. An old photograph, an unwritten letter, items that seemed to have no value, but contained a true treasure, a treasure that no one in the church or the world knew about. This treasure not only left the Vatican in stunned silence, but also made Pope Francis's family cry with deep, hidden emotions. Let's uncover the secrets behind the empty inheritance, things that only after his passing we began to understand clearly. Don't forget to leave a comment with number 1 if you relate to this story, or number 0 if you have a different opinion. Share your thoughts with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, where we will reveal all the secrets behind this story. He left no throne, no crown, only an empty room, a few handwritten papers, and the tears of his family. Pope Francis, who had profoundly moved the world with his ultimate humility, passed away without leaving any material possessions, no recognition whatsoever. But he left behind a series of silent secrets that shocked the entire Vatican and deeply moved his family. No one knew what he had carefully kept hidden throughout his life. No one could have imagined that an old photograph, an unwritten letter, would be the true treasure, a treasure unknown to anyone in the church, yet one that made his loved ones weep with hidden emotion, uncovering the full secret behind the empty inheritance that left the Vatican in stunned silence, and the family of Pope Francis unable to hold back their tears. The saint chose nothing. On April 21, 2025, Easter Monday at Doma Sancti Martha, the humble home Pope Francis had called home. The alarm clock rang at 7:35 a.m., and his heart stopped after an irreparable stroke. He passed away in silence, just as he had lived simply, refusing grand ceremonies and always avoiding the luxurious privileges typically associated with the papacy. However, what deeply moved both the Vatican and especially his family in Argentina was not the news of his passing, but the astonishing emptiness he left behind. It was not an emptiness of spirit, but a true emptiness of material possessions. The very next day, officials from the Holy See began inventorying his belongings. Francis's personal room had nothing that resembled the room of a leader of over 1 billion Catholic followers worldwide. There were no luxury watches, no gold-plated crosses, no bank cards, no safe, no valuable paintings, and no storage space. All they found were a few simple items: clothes, a worn pair of shoes, some theological books with pencil annotations, a picture of the Virgin Mary hanging next to the bed, and a Bible so old that its spine was torn apart. Nothing else. A cardinal murmured, "He left with nothing but peace of mind." When his family, especially his devoted sister Maria Elena Bergoglio, was informed about the state of his personal belongings, they cried not because of poverty, but because of the radical nature of the choice to renounce that Jorge had lived by throughout his life. He was a man who left us nothing, and in doing so, he left us everything. Later, Maria Elena shared in an interview with Clarin that this voluntary poverty was not surprising to those who had followed Francis's life from the very beginning. As Pope, he refused to live in the Apostolic Palace, where previous popes resided in rooms decorated lavishly with dozens of servants at their disposal. Instead, he chose Doma Sancti Martha, the Vatican guest house, to live as an ordinary priest, dining with other cardinals in the common dining room, serving himself, and never using a limousine. He didn't own a personal credit card. All nominal income from his office was directed to the Vatican's general fund, with a small portion allocated for his pastoral visits, not for himself, but for organizing meetings with poor refugees and the sick. When a journalist asked him in 2020 if he owned anything personal, he simply smiled and said, "A pair of old shoes, a rosary, and too many prayers in my pocket." His family were working-class Italian immigrants in Buenos Aires, and they had never received any wealth or privileges since he became pope. No villas were built, no scholarships were named after the Bergoglio family, no trust funds were set up for the descendants. "We still continue to live as we always have," his grandson once said. When legal experts examined the officially stored will, they found only a simple clause. "I leave no personal assets. Please use anything left to help the poor access education." There were no assets, no heirs, and no instructions regarding real estate or bank accounts to be transferred. The entire material legacy of Francis was summarized on an insignificant piece of paper, and it was this that made his spiritual legacy invaluable. He chose to leave nothing behind because he believed that everything must be returned to its rightful place, where it is needed most. Cardinal Kevin Farrell spoke in a memorial address. And in that way, he left more than any pope before him. From Argentina, the media reported that when Maria Elena received the list of Jorge's personal belongings, a simple sheet of paper sent by the Vatican, she was silent for a long while before saying one sentence: "He left as our mother taught us, we carry nothing but our kind hearts." Pope Francis once said, "A poor church for the poor." But perhaps what he left behind were intangible values that no one could measure. He never made it clear that the Pope should also be the poorest among them. And now, as his room at Doma Sancti Martha stands empty, with the things he left not safely stored, but lying in the hearts of others, poverty has become the most powerful symbol in Francis's life. Letters from a brother. It is said that a pope leaves behind apostolic counsel, messages, and historic speeches for posterity. But Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, before passing away on Easter Monday morning, April 21, 2025, left a very different, very private, and deeply emotional legacy specifically for his loved ones. It was not a sermon, nor a theological will. These were handwritten letters, written by his own hand, not printed, not typed, sent to his sister, his nephews, nieces, and a few childhood friends in Buenos Aires. According to revelations from the Vatican archives, a total of 11 letters were found in the drawer of his desk at Doma Sancti Martha. Each letter was neatly numbered and sealed with red wax, with dates ranging from January to early April 2025, as if he had a premonition of his impending departure. Notably, the first letter was marked Elena, for Elena, the only one who always knew before I said anything. The content of the letters, according to Maria Elena, had nothing to do with the Vatican, the reforms of the Curia, or church politics. On the contrary, they were a series of heartfelt memories, almost like fragmented recollections of a brother wanting to confide before saying goodbye. In one letter, Jorge mentioned the morning in 1961 when they both rode their bikes to the Flores Church for the first time to serve at Mass. He wrote, "I never told you, but that day, if you hadn't encouraged me, I might have given up and never become a priest, let alone a pope. So if anyone is responsible for all of this, it's you." Maria Elena recounted in an interview with Radio Mater that when she read that passage, she broke down in tears, not because of simple emotion, but because for the first time, Jorge had forced himself to admit something he had never said throughout their years together. Another letter was written to his nephew Ignacio, who lost his father when he was young and was briefly cared for by Jorge. Francis wrote, "I leave you no material possessions, but perhaps I have passed on something more important. Never let silence fill the place of justice." That quote, after being cited in an informal press conference in Buenos Aires, quickly spread on social media and was regarded as the most significant political will Francis had ever written. But it was a will for his family, not for the world. No one in his family knew these letters existed, and no one could imagine that they contained such profound thoughts and heartfelt emotions from the heart of a brother, a grandfather. In the final months of his life, despite being busy with his declining health, diplomatic audiences, and the early preparations for his funeral, Pope Francis quietly took time to reconnect with himself. As a brother, an uncle, an old friend, a human being, not a pope, not in ceremonial robes. In his final handwritten letter to his sister, there was a passage that made the entire family cry non-stop. "I'm sorry I wasn't present at Mother's memorial. I'm sorry I missed my granddaughter's wedding. I'm sorry that whenever something happens in the family, I can only make a call for a few minutes and then disappear because of my schedule." Being the Pope was never a legitimate reason to lose a part of Jorge that you once knew. There were no flowery words, no ecclesiastical authority, only sincere regret left by a family member, not for the world, but for their own loved ones. When the letters were delivered to Maria Elena and the other family members, they decided not to disclose their full contents. They only shared a few short excerpts with the press to show that Jorge never forgot who he was, even after becoming one of the most powerful figures in the world. At the upcoming funeral, one of the letters is expected to be read as part of the farewell. These lines are brief but heavy with meaning. "If there is one thing I regret most in my life, it is that I did not say thank you often enough." The family decided to print these letters in a small book, not for widespread release, but to preserve them for future generations, so that when they ask about Jorge Bergoglio, they will not hear about a pope, but about a brother, an uncle, a regular man who loved with the quietest part of his life. Perhaps this is exactly what marks the profound difference in the final legacy of Francis, not for the Church, but for those he loved most, in the form of his true self, not as Pope, but as Jorge. The Secret Will. On the fourth day after Pope Francis's passing, the Vatican officially released a special appendix accompanying his spiritual will, which stated there would be no distribution of assets because there was nothing significant to share, except to explain a silent act he had never mentioned throughout his life, not even to his immediate family. In a brief document, less than 400 words, kept in a sealed envelope, the Vatican revealed that Pope Francis had quietly dedicated his meager savings from his nominal salary to establish a scholarship fund named after his mother, Regina Maria Siveri. The fund was called the Fondo Regina Regina, and no one, including his sister Maria Elena, knew of it. The existence of this fund was due to the fact that, from the very beginning, Francis had stipulated that his name should not be used for any public activities related to the fund, and it was only to be revealed after his death. This scholarship fund was not for seminarians, not for theology students, and not for anyone within the ranks of the Church. It was clearly designated for homeless children, stateless children, those without access to education in Buenos Aires, where he had once seen their hungry eyes as a young priest. In the attached file, there was a handwritten dedication by Pope Francis for those who do not have what I have. The first person to cry when reading this appendix was not a cardinal or a curia official, but Maria Elena. She said in a brief press conference in Flores, "Jorge didn't just preach about poverty. He lived in it, he chose it, and he gave back everything he could." According to financial records confirmed by intermediary organizations, the Regina Fund had quietly received small monthly transfers from Pope Francis since 2015, accumulating about 380,000 euros over more than 10 years. All of this was sent through an anonymous charity organization in Argentina to avoid drawing attention. If Jorge's story touches your heart, don't forget to share your thoughts and hit like on this video. Let us know how you feel about his legacy of love and humility. Notably, Pope Francis requested that the fund be managed by the missionaries of charity, not by clergy or any administrative body of the Vatican. The reason was that they were the only ones who never asked about power, only about need. In the fund's operational records, there is a handwritten note from Pope Francis addressed to the person in charge. "I don't want anyone to know that I am behind this, but if those children have the opportunity to go to school, then that is a debt I must repay to the children who once clung to my legs and asked, 'Father, what can you do for me?'" At the Villa 31 slum, where Francis had served as Father Jorge, news of the Fondo Regina spread faster than any press release. An older nun there remarked, "He used to come here with muddy shoes. Now he returns in a different way." In the first week after the fund was announced, more than 200 applications from immigrant families, homeless children, and those without papers were submitted, hoping to become the first students to receive a scholarship no one had ever imagined would come from a pope. But why was such a wonderful act kept in complete secrecy? Perhaps the answer lies in a final personal note that Francis wrote in his journal. "We are living in an era where even kindness is suspected as a tool to gain trust. I don't need trust for myself. I only need it for those children." Not everyone agreed with his actions. Some advisors at the Vatican believed that the Pope should not personalize social responsibility. But if there was anything that made this action extraordinary, it was the silence that rejected glory, the choice to leave no trace but leave behind results. His family did not inherit any material wealth, but they received a spiritual gift greater than any inheritance, the truth that Jorge had lived fully according to his conscience. They could not hold back their tears when they saw the small plaque engraved with the words "Fonda Porlob," placed in front of a makeshift classroom made of corrugated metal in Buenos Aires, where Francis had once taught catechism as a young seminarian. That photo was later framed by his sister and hung in her living room, not as a victory, but as evidence of her brother's silent choice to never keep kindness for himself. The photo he never showed to the world. Among the few personal belongings found at Doma Sancti Martha, Pope Francis's final residence, was a small item initially overlooked, an old yellowed photo hidden inside a 1980 Spanish-language theology book. The photo had no silver frame, was not laminated, and had no luxury to it. But when the photo was taken out, the entire room fell silent. It was a family photo taken on the porch of their house in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires in the summer of 1964. In the photo, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, then about 28 years old, stands next to his mother Regina and father Mario Jose, with his sister Maria Elena. The house behind them was nothing but a simple dwelling. The single-story house was unremarkable, but the smiles on everyone's faces, especially Jorge's, were captivating. On the back of the photo, in faint but certain handwriting, was written, "Perdón. This is where I learned everything about forgiveness." No one at the Vatican knew he always carried this photo, and no one, Not even his family knew it still existed. Maria Elena, when shown the photo, cried like a child. "I thought it had been lost a long time ago," she said. "Jorge used to stick it on the headboard of his bed when he was a philosophy student. Then he went to study theology in Chile, then to the seminary, and it disappeared. I never thought he had kept it all these years." What was special was not just the photo, but the meaning Pope Francis attached to it. According to a close priest, he carried the photo on most of his international pastoral trips, from Manila to Lampedusa, from Congo to Canada. The photo was always kept in his personal suitcase, along with books and a rosary. The photo was a silent symbol of a past he never shared publicly. "When I saw the photo, I understood why he lived that way," said a close assistant. "Not because he was Pope, but because he was always the son of that house, a disciple of forgiveness from there." The photo, which the Vatican later confirmed had never been publicly disclosed, never appeared in any photo exhibitions or the official biography of Pope Francis. Unconsciously, he chose to keep the most sacred thing for himself, a corner of memory not meant for display, but for preservation. The most touching detail was a note he left in his brief will about the photo. "If there is one place I would want to return to, it is this photo. Not to my homeland, not to Argentina, not to a church, but to that photo." Vatican historians immediately regarded this as one of the most profound personal symbols ever left by a pope, in an era where all leadership images are carefully crafted and controlled. Francis's old family photo appeared as a break from the tradition of power, reminding the world that no matter where he was, he remained just a son, a brother, a child once beloved in Buenos Aires. When the photo was returned to the family, Maria Elena did something surprising. She enlarged the photo, not to display it in a church, but to give it to a school for disabled children that Jorge had supported in the 1990s. She said, "My brother wanted to return this photo so the children could see it every day. That's how he wanted to be remembered." And so, the small photo, hidden in a suitcase for decades, was placed in the hallway of the school with the inscription, "This is where I learned everything about forgiveness from Pope Francis." The photo was not shocking. It held no secrets, no revelations or sensationalism, but it carried a weight that made anyone who stopped to look unable to move forward. It reminded them that behind a pope is a human being, and behind every human being is a memory. And perhaps memory is the last and most profound thing we leave for those we love. An apology. No one asked for. While the Vatican remained busy preparing for the official funeral of Pope Francis, a piece of information quietly spread from the doctrinal office, which stores the private theological and spiritual documents of the popes, leaving Vatican observers stunned in silence. Not because of any political or canonical reasons, but because of the existence of an unpublished letter kept in a pale blue file with a note confirming Tradici, dated March 13, 2013, the exact day Jorge Mario Bergoglio was elected Pope. The 3-page handwritten letter, written in Italian, did not have the recipient's name listed on the front, but in the opening he addressed the reader with a respectful phrase. "Padre Hans, dear Father Hans, who listened to me before I became a public figure." According to the archival records, the recipient was Father Hans Zner, a German theologian, and one of Jorge's private confessors when he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. The content of the letter was not intended to explain the Church's politics, nor was it a directive for the leadership. It was an apology, a quiet confession, a spiritual will meant only for the one who had seen him in his most vulnerable moments. He said, "I entered the conclave with empty hands, but I left with something heavier than anything, responsibility and sins I never dared to name." He did not specify what those sins were, but later in the letter, there was a particular passage emphasizing the time he spent in Argentina during the 1970s and 1980s, the bloody period of the military dictatorship when many priests and laypeople were kidnapped, tortured, and killed. A time when Bergoglio himself was questioned about whether he had remained silent when he should have spoken out. "I chose silence out of fear, out of a desire to protect my brothers. But silence is also a form of denial, and I owe them, not a material debt, but a debt of the soul." No one had ever asked him to apologize for this, even though some human rights organizations criticized him in the early 2000s. Pope Francis was exonerated by the very survivors, but he never felt relief. The letter was accompanied by a special clause stating that it should not be published, not circulated, and only opened if he passed away without the opportunity to say these things publicly. And now, the time had come for the Holy See to contact the family to ask for permission to share a copy of the letter as part of his spiritual legacy. His family members were utterly stunned. No one in the family, not even Maria Elena, had ever heard him mention this. But after reading it, she simply said, "Jorge always apologized for things no one ever blamed him for." There is a passage in the letter dedicated specifically to the family, perhaps the reason why the Vatican decided to share it. "If one day I cannot return to Argentina, please remember that it is still the place where I owe my family, my country, and my conscience so much." The family decided not to make the entire letter public, but agreed to store an excerpt at the Vatican as a biblical passage on humility, as stated by Cardinal Kurt Coe. Western theologians regarded this as something unprecedented. The document reveals that a reigning pope, on the very day of his election, chose to confess rather than exalt himself. A pope began his papacy not with a grand sermon, but with a quiet confession of his past. A Catholic scholar remarked, "He did not leave behind a great theological will, but this letter alone is enough for posterity to understand that the truth does not lie in power, but in the courage to admit one's mistakes." When the family placed a copy of the letter next to the old photo in their home in Flores, where Jorge had called the place where I learned everything about forgiveness, everyone remained silent. There were no tears, no anger, just a wave of very human emotion, a sense of relief knowing that Jorge had carried a complete soul. The empty room, the full heart. Though Pope Francis had passed away, people felt his presence more clearly than ever before, not through monuments, not through canonization ceremonies, but through the eyes of the children receiving the Fondo Regina scholarships, through the pages of handwritten letters, through the piece of paper left behind by a person who dared to apologize. The Vatican then decided to leave the room unchanged, not renovated, and not open to the public, but noted in its internal records that this was the final space of a person who had rejected the material throne to build a throne in the hearts of humanity. Months later, Maria Elena returned to Rome once again. This time, not to say goodbye, but to give the chair that Pope Francis used to write his letters, a simple wooden chair, slightly wobbly, to a poor school in Argentina. Before leaving Doma Sancti Martha, she paused in front of the door, closing behind her, placed her hand on the doorknob, and whispered, "You left me nothing, but I have received everything." And indeed, Mario Bergoglio left no money, no power, no symbols of fame, But he left behind a way of life where the Pope did not stand above humanity, where holiness began with humility, and where death was not the end, but the door that opened to an eternal legacy. What do you think about his incredible legacy? Do you believe that true greatness comes from humility and love, not from wealth or power? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. See you in the next video.